Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Wellbeing webinar. Thank you for joining us today. On the panel today, we have Jenny Lee from Talent International, who's the head of HR there. And we also have Johnny Merkin, who is the CEO and founder of Givenwell. And we will also have Brad from the CEO and founder of Hub joining us soon as well. So thank you all for joining us today. I think this is a topic that we get a lot of questions about at Great Place to Work, which is why we wanted to host a webinar on it. Great Place to Work has just completed a wellbeing survey and wellbeing report with Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins has looked at the last 6 years of data from Great Place to Work. And through that process, they've looked at the trends that they're seeing, not only in Australia, but they've also done the same report in many other countries. And what they're seeing is this trend analysis for wellbeing in the workplace, where wellbeing was okay before COVID, wasn't great. But what we actually saw was a huge spike in wellbeing from employees during COVID, which seems a bit odd, but really what we saw is workplaces actually spending a lot more time and effort in taking care of their employees and really wanting to make sure that their wellbeing was okay. And what we've seen post-COVID is actually this really huge drop in wellbeing sentiment from employees. So what we wanted to do really was talk to some people who are actually forefront of this with organizations and talk about what they're seeing in their organizations and what they're seeing in other organizations, the things that they can talk to you about helping your organizations get better at workplace wellbeing, because we do see that there are certainly a lot of articles and trends coming out about how wellbeing and burnout is not as great as it could be in Australian workplaces. So we're going to get started. We've got a few questions, everyone. So thank you to the panel for joining us and spending your time with us today. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to start with a fundamental question. Jenny, I might go to you first, but when we say wellbeing at work, what are we actually talking about and how do you define it in your organization?
Thanks, Rebecca, and it's great to be here. I think well-being has become such a broad topic. So how I would best define well-being at work is the environment and the surrounding aspects of it that enable our people to do meaningful and purposeful work without sacrificing their health, their energy, and their ability to thrive. And as we all know, the world we're working right now is incredibly demanding. The pace of work is relentless, competition is really fierce, and change is constant. And we're moving at pace with this incessant focus to do more with less. And I'm sure everybody has heard and felt that in every way. And I think when it comes to well-being, it is a shared responsibility. It's not just on our people, but also on our leaders and the wider company. It's also about having the right environment and the systems in place that people can fall back on when times get tough. And aim to really enhance the lived experience of our people, not just today, but every day from here.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I love that the point of that around change is constant, which it totally is at the moment, and getting used to that's really hard for everyone. Johnny, how about yourself? What do you see as well-being at work?
Hi, nice to meet everyone here. And thanks again for having me. Yeah, look, it's a really interesting one for us. And it's kind of one question that I usually ask when I meet with people as well, is what is well-being? I actually tend to find everyone has a different answer. So I kind of don't necessarily believe there's one answer or definition of what it actually means. At the end of the day, if we're talking about teams and workplaces, we're a collection of all kinds of humans. So everyone in a team's got a different story, different background, cultures, religions, ages. We live in different places. And so what well-being means for one person can be very different for someone else. And I think potentially that's one of the challenges, is that people are all working off different definitions and having really good intentions. And when we work off different definitions to begin with, sometimes we can miss the mark. So yeah, I guess if I'm trying to define it and think about what well-being at work for me is, it's kind of really leaning in and understanding, well, what is well-being for each individual? And then how do we approach that and support them while they're at work to try and make life a bit better?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think that's a great segue. We'll talk about that in a little bit in regards to how we sort of look at well-being across multiple generations and different backgrounds and all of your employees and workplace. But Brad, I wanted to ask you the same question. You have the added dimension of you also run a business, but you also have a business where other businesses work. So when you think about well-being from your point of view, what do you see?
Sorry, I joined a little bit late there as well. There was a couple of technical difficulties, but I am here. It's just to build on what Jenny and Johnny had said, because I agree with all of what they said, to bring that into more of a numerical side of things. So we have a team experience score. And we've also got as you rightly point out, Rebecca, we've got a whole bunch of customers that also use our workspaces, and that's where we have the more standard NPS and customer experience type scores, but we also get a whole bunch of different data. And like ultimately, if our customers are using the workspace, there's a pretty good chance they're going to renew. That's just at a basic business level, and therefore we need to constantly be thinking about how do we have engaged employees of our customers. We call them our members. So it's very important to us there to understand how is everybody feeling about their workspace, and that's a really, really good proxy for us of, well, are people well in the workspace? And certainly what we're finding, an interesting statistic there around, we're really seeing people craving for in-person interaction, and a lot of that comes from the workplace. So we actually see people's wellness at work increasing when they do come into the workspace. On our actual team side of things, we have a team experience score, which we apart from the great places to work data, which of course does take into account what Johnny was talking about there, like everybody has different things that are important to them, and that's where you've got that huge amount of diversity of different data there, which is really helpful. But then we also get constant weekly and monthly feedback from the team, and overall we have that team experience score as our proxy for, is our team doing well? And that's informed by things like, are they getting the learning and development? Are they getting the leadership? Are they getting the autonomy and what forth? And we see that ultimately, if people are happy at work, they're going to be well at work.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was great. I think that sort of covers so much, especially in regards to what it looks like when people are actually feeling great at work as well. So Johnny, I might go on to you now and ask a couple of questions specifically for you, but your personal experience with burnout leading to hospitalization ultimately inspired Given Well. How did that journey shape your understanding of what employees actually need versus what organizations are typically offering in the wellbeing space?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one. There's a lot of conversation, I guess, about burnout. It's kind of one of the most common words thrown around. There's lots of data and information. And again, kind of to your last question, defining actually what is burnout. I think as kind of people leaders and as organizations, we kind of have an idea of what we think burnout is. For me, I actually had no idea what burnout was until I was in hospital. And that was kind of a moment for me of going, oh, wow, okay, it sucks. And I guess, the way it manifested for me was my body was shutting down and, it was affecting all kinds of parts of my life. And I think my experience of, I guess, team wellbeing before that point had always been the kind of off the shelf, one size for everybody approaches. So, you've got your EAPs, your health insurances, you've got your sick leaves, you've got your fruit bowls, whatever it is. And I think there's this kind of understanding as an organization up to that point of like, if you want to look after your people, you need to do this thing. And of course, my experience was very different to that. It involved therapy, it involved nutrition, it involved exercise, it involved meditation. There were lots of facets. It wasn't just mental health, it was physical, it was emotional, all kinds of things. And I think for me, that's probably been the big learning going through my own experience, is that actually wellbeing is this holistic thing. And that, if you want to kind of address wellbeing, you need to be thinking about it in all aspects, not just in a one-dimensional, traditional way.
Yeah, great. And I think and when you set up Given Well, you obviously interviewed a lot of leaders around it and sort of spoke to them about what they were doing. What did you find that were the gaps between what companies thought they were doing in regards to wellbeing and what employees actually needed?
Yeah, so for most organizations, there hasn't been a lot of choice. So in most cases, they will just go with the usual approaches, EAP, insurance. Some might go a bit further with some other benefits and workshops and things. But when we interviewed those customers, what they were all saying to us were the two fundamental challenges. The first one being that most ways that we look after our teams are reactive. So that's where this kind of bottom of the cliff mentality is, right? EAPs for people who are already in crisis most of the time. Insurance is when they're already sick. Same for sick leave or mental health leave. These things kick in when people are unwell and need support. So they're really important. But we know, I'm sure everyone's pretty across the idea that we want to be top of the cliff, right? We want to be thinking proactively when it comes to wellbeing. So that was kind of one of the biggest gaps. And I guess the other big gap came down to this idea of engagement and utilization, which ultimately affected impact. So again, whatever organizations have been trying, from the EAPs to other things, you'd see utilization tends to be pretty low. So anywhere from 1% to 20% is usually the range for most initiatives. And so that's really good when people engage, but of course it means that 80% of a team often won't get any support. And when we looked at why and asked those organizations why, they identified fundamentally it came down to this idea of trying to do one thing for an entire team. And it's, some people love therapy, some people don't. Some people love going to the gym, some don't. And this idea of as long as we're trying to do a one size fits all approach, we're just going to have limited engagement, which ultimately will be, limited impact. So those were the kind of the two, big areas that we identified ultimately, and then, started working around.
Yeah, and when you give employees that freedom, what are you seeing, or how are they actually using it? What does GivenWell see from employees that have that autonomy to choose what wellbeing looks like for them?
It's been really interesting. So our approach kind of coming out of that research was, what if we empowered teams to care for themselves? So what if as an organization, we actually got out of the way and provided the teams with a budget that they could then spend on support they choose, right? So we're only a baby. So we only, we launched August last year. So we're still pretty new to all of this. But what we've seen has been really interesting. So in the first year since doing this approach, we've actually seen a 99% engagement. So 99% of staff who've been given access to a wellbeing allowance through GivenWell have spent it. And what we've seen is they've spent it on all kinds of things. Some things obvious that you'd expect, like therapists and coaches. But we've seen people spend it on mole maps, perimenopausal support, ADHD coaching, surfing, massage, mindfulness, meditation, yoga, like all kinds. And, every day we see something that we wouldn't have expected. And it's just this kind of lesson to ourselves of, wow, like actually well-being is all these different things for different people. And so fundamentally, I guess that's been the big learning for us, and just seeing all the ways people do. Well-being for someone can be paying for their dentist because they couldn't afford to go, whereas someone else, it could be actually going and speaking with a coach or something. And so, it's been really awesome to see.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I guess, Brad, I'm going to go to you next as a follow-on to that, because Hub Australia focuses on workplace and community. And how does the physical workspace influence people's mental and emotional well-being? So what role do you think the flexibility and hospitality-driven approach play in helping people feel genuinely cared for? Because we have Johnny talking about what's personal for them, and it could be very different, but obviously community is a really big part of well-being as well. And so how do you see that playing out at Hub?
Yeah, sure thing. And I will just start off by saying completely agree with what Johnny's saying about that. You need a personalized approach, and everybody's looking for something different. But I'd also add to that all of these things are well and good, but kind of irrelevant if you haven't got the base of the pyramid stuff right. And we can come up with a whole bunch of different things, but and I know great place to work data is often like, if you've got a crappy manager, or the pay conditions are not right, or like health and safety or work and what forth are not right, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get to have the thing about a wellness fund, or to bring it back onto your question there. If people can work from anywhere, why are they coming to the office? And a headline, it's not to do work, or not work as we traditionally think about it. And we need to make sure that people recognize the role of the workplace there is not, for instance, to come in and do a spreadsheet, or to join a video conference call. What people are looking for from that experience at the office is to connect with their teammates, to learn, to innovate. Or it might even be that, hey, this is my day out of the office, where part of the way my day out of home, where part of the way you've earned the commute, is that I'll see a show after work, or I'll catch a friend, or I'll go to the gym. So, people are looking for an experience when they come into the office. Because it's not just to do, work. And that's where we see the hospitality angle that, for instance, Hub and a lot of other co-working and flex operators focus on. There's that thing of, hospitality is not like it's not the list of customer services. It's ultimately the way you make people feel. It's what is that memorable experience, and if we're providing that to our members, then that in turn becomes part of the experience that they have with their employer, which is our customer. I think you were going to ask a follow-on or something.
I was, sorry, and I was on mute and I was trying to push the button. So I love that. I love the community aspect of that, and how you talk about the experience of being at work, because I think it's one thing that we all kind of miss when we're not in work. And from a Great Place to Work perspective, we're all remote, and when we get together, I don't think any work actually gets done because we're chatting and talking to each other. But when you think about, I guess, the more holistic approach to well-being, and when you talk about it's not just physical and mental health, but it's also purpose and belonging and flexibility, how do you think it ties into creating more inclusive moments that reduce that loneliness?
Yeah, sure thing. So look, people always want to be part of something bigger. And that is something that, like, all humans want to be part of something bigger. Everybody's got their own version of what that something bigger is, but we all want to feel a part of something. And the physical place is well understood to be a key part of how you build community. And when people choose their workspace, they are when a GM or a CEO or a founder, whoever that might be, chooses a workspace for their company, they are saying something about their brand. They're saying something about what their team means to them, and they're saying something about what their values and culture and values and culture is. So I think one of the really key things there is people need to be really deliberate about that workplace choice, because it really goes a long way to helping address people feeling a part of something, which removes that loneliness and what forth and connects with people. So that's where I think workspace is often overlooked as kind of like that's an expense rather than this is an investment in my culture and brand.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Great Place to Work, we talk about that a lot. It's like HR is not a fluffy cost center. It's actually, it comes into all of these things, and creating a great workplace is more than just one thing. It's all of these things combining together to make it somewhere where people want to be, whether that's physically or online or whatever that is. It's having that place that people really connect and feel like they're part of something. And so the last question I have for you, Brad, was around Hub's Love Where You Work report that's just come out, which talked about the death of the Friday night drink. And I think anyone who's sort of been in the city on a Friday night recently has probably seen that that's not the case anymore. The pubs aren't as full as they used to be. But what do you see is taking its place, and how does it reflect the growing importance of human connection and well-being as technology and AI continue to shape how we work?
Yeah, good. Thanks for bringing us to that report. Like, look, one of those things is this is not to say that everybody no longer wants to be social. Yes, we've seen differences in, for instance, alcohol consumption, but it's not like we've seen any differences in people wanting to be social. It's just that when the pandemic came about, we looked to our personal friends, to our families, and what forth to fill that gap, like that absolute core need that we all have for being around other people or social or learning, whatever your flavor is. So we adapted to get that from something else. And then when lockdowns came off, we didn't snap back. We quite liked having our time with our personal friends or with our family, or choosing different hobbies that we undertook by ourselves, or with new people. We didn't decide that we'd snap back and doing that stuff with people from work. And so this is where we've seen it. Yes, there's a death of a Friday drink. But then there was this interesting paradox of, hey, we're not wanting to drink with our colleagues anymore, but we're yearning for more time with our workmates. And again, that's kind of like, we want work from home, but then we're desperate for more time with our colleagues. And it's kind of like something's got to give. And this has a lot to do with the death of the Friday drink, where what we're now seeing is that people want more purposeful, deliberate, and meaningful interactions with their colleagues. So, getting drunk, to just use the term, on a Friday night, is no longer something that anybody looks for from their work colleagues. But what they really do want to have is have a shared learning opportunity. Or, for instance, one of our favorite things that we set up, which was different to how we used to do things, was like a painting class with all of our different colleagues. And for instance, at that, I did a painting. It was a really terrible painting, but I gave that to my daughter. And so there was a way of, okay, so this is now something where every time I walk into my daughter's room, there's a painting that I did with colleagues. And anyway, everybody will have their own version of that, but people are looking for a meaningful interaction with their colleagues, because ultimately that will build the relationships, which then creates a better team, and then creates better business outcomes and career outcomes.
Fantastic. I love that. It's that purposeful interactions rather than just the meaningless ones. Like, we're going to come together to do something that works for everybody, or is an experience for everyone, which is fantastic. Thank you. Jenny, I want to come to you next, because Talent International has been recognised as one of Australia's best workplaces, and also one of the best workplaces in New Zealand, which is amazing. And as a head of HR, obviously this is something that you have to think about a lot in amongst everything else that you do. But can you tell us what specific practices or policies that you have that directly impact wellbeing at Talent International?
Thanks, Rebecca. And the Great Place to Work, well, Best Workplace badge is one that we definitely wear proudly. So thanks again. But what Johnny was saying earlier, and Brad does, it really resonates. Talking about, when Johnny was talking about the reactive policies or practices versus the proactive, and how there is such a strong gap between the two when we talk about employee wellbeing. At Talent, we have a good number of practices that we live by, but one that I can speak to is the most recent initiative that we had launched, which is Talent Day. And on this day and every year, we provide every team member access to proactive health checks, fully covered by Talent. And for us, it's more than just an initiative. It's about continuing to build a culture where investing in your wellness is a core part of your job. And when people take care of themselves, as we know, this mindset and these behaviors ripple around to everyone surrounding them. And when they're energized and healthy, this energy is then spread together to our teams, but also allows everyone to thrive together for our customers. And just like with any initiative, it can be implemented well, but if it's not adopted and role modeled by your leadership team, then it's a cultural change that can be quite hard to shift. And, our leaders were really behind Why Talent Day initiative. And what really helped it stick was the opportunity they had taken to be vulnerable and authentic about their own health journeys, and how crucial it is to be, to put yourself first. For example, our CEO, Mark Nielsen, and he has been publicly, open about this, so I'm not sharing any sensitive information here, but he was very vocal about his health journey. He had done a health check just before doing High Rocks in Sydney. He received his results, and soon after he was in surgery to do a quadruple bypass for his heart. So very abrupt, very sudden. And I think it was a very powerful message to send. If you invest in yourself, it could save your life. And through our offering, we had an employee who had done a proactive skin check and was later diagnosed with early stages of carcinoma, which is a type of skin cancer. So all these stories and our lived experiences has demonstrated to us that, investing in yourself is non-negotiable. And it is a message that we live by and promote to our people every day. And it has to come from the top all the way down. So
I
that's
love
just
that. I love the embedding it in the culture and it being something that the leaders are proud of. And I think we see it obviously in workplaces that we work with a lot. When the leaders are really at the forefront of it and they're talking about it, it becomes embedded in the organization, and leading from the top really does make a huge difference. And so with your programs in your organization, how do you actually, I guess, check that they're working? Or do you have a way of measuring the programs that you put in place to make sure that they're actually having an impact on well-being as well?
Yeah, my approach for me, I just consider four main areas. I think the first is start with the opportunity, not the solution. So I find that this is where wellbeing initiatives can go wrong, where they start with a solution looking for a problem. So there's so many great ideas out there in the market we get excited to adopt and launch, but if that's not linking to the wider business's strategy and its purpose, this is where misalignment can occur. I think second for me is to unpack the opportunity. What systems or practices do we have in place? What's working well? What's not working well? Really lean on your feedback loops, whether that's your engagement survey, your focus groups, your one-on-ones, check-ins, your exit interviews, whatever it may be, to help you have a finger on the pulse on what your people actually need. And I think, just pulling the takeaways from Johnny and Brad, it's a very broad term, well-being. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be emotional, it could be social. So unpacking that clearly and understanding at a business-wide level, what do we need to prioritize, and then eventually get on that journey to make your wellbeing offering very holistic. And it's not going to be an overnight job. It's going to take time. For us on our journey, we took time with it. But it's important that we got it right and we really understood what the opportunity was there. Third, again, I had mentioned earlier, is to gain leadership buy-in. Like I had mentioned earlier, if it's not adopted, supported, and promoted from the top, the message you're wanting to send will not get fed down. And as a result, that will impact the cultural uplift and the momentum you may be seeking for. And lastly, measure the impact and share that accountability. Look at your engagement levels, your attrition score, your absenteeism rate, your change agility score, for example. Understand the impact and, most importantly, learn from it. Not everything is going to be perfect. I think just fail fast and learn from it. But if it went well, how do we elevate that going forward? What didn't work out so well? What do we need to change to ensure we're seeing improvement? It's also important to share that accountability as well. I don't think like with any business initiative, I don't think it should fall on your CEO or just the P&C team. It's a shared, responsibility, with our people, with the leadership team and the wider business.
Fantastic, thank you. And I love the note that you had around measuring it, but measuring it in lots of different ways, and things like change agility and things like that, because I think we're all well aware that well-being is more than just one thing. It's how people are feeling in an organization and how they feel about work, but it affects an enormous amount of their workplace. It's not just, I feel bad today, so I'm not coming into the office. It's not just how many sick days your team is taking. So it's a great segue into some of our next questions. So I might ask a couple more questions of each of you so you can all answer these questions, and then we'll go to some Q&A from those that are online. So feel free to drop into the chat or the Q&A section any questions that you have for our panel, and we'll get to those in a little minute. But if you're a manager in an organization right now and they wanted to assess their team's well-being, what should they actually be observing and asking about? Have any of you got any tips about how you've gone about that, either in your organizations or in other organizations you've worked with? Maybe we'll start with Johnny.
In the hot seat. Yeah, look, I think just it probably echoes something that Jenny was just talking about. I think it's actually asking the questions and listening to what people are saying. We see a lot of organizations kind of falling in love with these different ideas. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and so on. And if you want to actually meet, the team and where they are at, just sitting down and listening and talking to them. What do you do for well-being in your personal life? What would you like to do? So engagement surveys, exit surveys, all those things Jenny we're talking about, I'd say is definitely a really good place to start. And then I think probably echoing back to Brad, in terms of getting some of those basics right, there's no point of kind of going and building out this whole amazing well-being strategy if you've got a toxic workplace, or terrible managers and workloads unsustainable and all these other things. And so I think it's just kind of, if you're really wanting to assess where your team's well-being are, just sit down and talk to them. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be engagement surveys and all these, using all these crazy technologies. Like, they can be really good. Sometimes it's just a matter of do some one-on-ones and you'll get a pretty good feel for the room.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you.
just listen, just talk, keep it easy.
And so go back to the basics and talk to people. Right?
Yeah, most
How about
won't
you,
bite.
Brad? Thanks. Brad, have you seen how how do you do it at Hub, and how have you seen any organizations do anything different?
Yeah, look, we've got we've got all manner of different surveys. But I definitely come back to what Johnny said there of like, there's weekly one-on-ones that everybody has in different shapes or forms with their managers, and it's kind of like your best source of data is going to be right there. And where I use the word data, I don't mean that to I don't make it sound a little bit academic. It's more like, how do you record this? Like, how do you understand? Like, there are all these different snippets of feedback just sitting there. But if you haven't brought them all together, then you're not going to actually have it there to start making your decisions on. I think that there's another really important angle here. Like, if you've got like a trinity of how are you going at home, how are you going at work, and how are you going personally. If they always say, like, if one of them's not doing well, you'll be able to deal with it. But as soon as you've got two or more of them out of kilter, like, it's actually just hard to do anything. And it's almost like we could do all of the free massages or wellness this or that, and it just would not matter. If somebody's got all of other things happening outside of work and too many different things going on, so you need to actually understand that. So understanding the person and everything that's going on, and like, for instance, each month when we have our leadership meeting, everybody's got to share something that's going on for them outside of work. And just kind of that, like, a bit of understanding of like everybody's life is more than just work, and trying to bring that in, will serve you and all of your team members like really well to take an interest in those other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the things that we ask in the Great Place to Work survey is whether or not your manager cares about you as a person. It's such a critical thing for people even to feel a sense of belonging as well, that people understand who they are and what they're going through, and for organizations to have an understanding that sometimes people hit rough patches, but it doesn't mean that it lasts forever, and it doesn't mean that they're a bad employee, but there's certainly ways in which organizations can support people through really tough times as well. I think that's a fantastic point. Jenny, how about yourself? Is there anything that you think organizations could be observing, or how do you look at it at Talent International when you're trying to assess where people's well-being is at?
Oh, I wouldn't say anything too different. I think it's important to assess, how frequently your people are showing up to work and how they are showing up to work. What is the team's absenteeism rate? How do they respond to change? Are they engaged? Are they innovating? How well are they collaborating, not just across their own team, but outside of their own team? It's all also important to unpack, what well-being means to them. Like we were saying earlier, it's such a broad term. So whatever that need is, are we meeting them? If you understand that at an individual level, it's a great starting point for you to gauge the well-being of your team. Then obviously at a business level, and what changes you need to make from there. So I wouldn't say anything too significantly different.
Yeah, thank you. So a bit of a tip for everyone. So if the organizations are just starting their wellbeing journey, what's one change that they could implement in the next 30 days that would make a real difference to their organization? So Jenny, we'll start with you. Awesome.
Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer in really unpacking what are the sentiments or the key themes that our people are feeling. So if we're talking about well-being, what's the perception of how we are doing well in the well-being space? And just falling back on, the feedback we are getting from them directly. I talked about, the engagement survey. We do that once a year, but we also have pulse check-ins throughout the year as well. We do focus groups where needed. We also, look at data through our X interview, for example, and many more various sources, but really leaning on the data and what is it saying to you. And if you don't have those mechanisms or those channels in place, really do strongly recommend you get that, those feedback loops. Otherwise, you're just going really blind in terms of, assuming what our people need from a wellbeing point of view. So I think definitely get the mechanism and the channels in place, really start looking at the data and comparing that year on year, so you understand, has it improved, has it not, why is that, and actually learn from the data. So that would be my main tip.
Great, thank you. Brad, what about yourself? What do you think an organisation could do in the next month that would have an impact on wellbeing?
Well, you could send out a great place to work survey. I'm sure you'd like
Thanks.
us to.
I'll bring you $20 later. Thanks.
And I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be that, but it is kind of we'll get the data so you know where you're at, would be a great starting point. Just to borrow a quote that I got from a seminar I was in yesterday, and I jotted it down because I thought, oh, this is good material. Stephen Bartlett from Diary of a CEO, who was also quoting somebody else, but said, burnout is a lack of meaning at work. Now, I do think that you could have a whole lot of meaning at work and still just work too many damn hours over too many years at a certain stress level that you will still burn out. It's not you have meaning and you'll never burn out. But for the most part, if you can start to get that data around the why and why people are working with you, you'll get a really good insight into, are you taking care of your team, and do you have risks of burnout there?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And Johnny, what about you? What do you think someone could do in the next 30 days that would help start the journey to improving workplace wellbeing?
I think, I guess it really depends on who the organization is. So, it's going to be probably very different depending on the size and the makeup of your team. So, I'm just thinking, we have customers, with teams all around the world, and they have lots of data and they do engagement surveys and they have exit interviews. And so it's really easy to surface some of the insights and then kind of take that on board. But, most organizations who work with us are actually smaller teams, or they're, we have forestry customers and tradies and, all kinds of different organizations where it might be 90% guys. And, as a guy, I can probably say a lot of guys don't want to share what well-being means and how they're feeling and so on. And so sometimes it's actually really hard to get that data. So I guess step one would be just consider the type of organization and what is going to be the best way to actually, approach it, and how do you get the information and what's going to resonate. Like EAPs, typically 2/3 of engagement will come from females, not from males. So, just things like that, just to consider if you're just starting to get into it. I guess another question is kind of, what does impact actually mean? So if you're wanting to do wellbeing and you're wanting to make impact, you probably need to define what impact looks like. So, is that going to be less burnout, less sick leave? Is it going to be more engagement or productivity? Is it going to be less churn? Is it recruiting the best people? And like, how are you going to measure, how you understand, how do you actually, say we're succeeding? And I think there's probably not a lot of point of doing anything until you've actually set those metrics. And so something that we do with GivenWell, which is really important, is we measure, how has this impacted people's well-being? How has it impacted retention and engagement and those key metrics? And then we're able to actually kind of see, is it helping? And then I guess, probably bias, but, in terms of the question of what's one thing you could do is, from our experience, it's getting out of the way. Don't overthink it. Don't try and insert yourself if you don't need to. The biggest thing, if you're just starting in wellbeing, is probably actually working on others in the exec team to secure some budget. Because if you want to make real impact and you want to have, outcomes that are going to be positive, you're going to need budget at the end of the day. You can't sit down one-on-one with everyone in your team. You can't bring in 100 different providers to do something that meets everyone where they're at, you're going to need budget. And if you're starting now, you probably want to have those conversations early, start getting it into the P&L for next year, or at least having the conversations with the CFO or the CEO, or if you're the business owner, start thinking about, okay, what is appropriate? Because from what we see, organizations have all kinds of budgets. Some organizations will spend $10 a head on wellbeing, and that's enough for them. In given well, obviously that wouldn't really work. We see organizations spending anywhere from $50 a month up to hundreds of dollars a month on support, and it really just comes down to where the organization is at, what they think of as impact, and how they budget. So that's a very long answer, but yeah, and it's more than one. But consider your team and your industry, and then really just start trying to work on getting some budgets, because without budgets, it's really, really hard. There's heaps of things you can do out there that don't cost a lot of money, but they're often just ticking a box. And if you're not wanting to just tick the box, you're going to have to find budget, fundamentally, find a way to get it.
Just to build on something there, if you don't mind, Beck,
Yeah, go for it.
that Johnny says, a tip there in terms of where to find budget, go and have a look at the things you currently do spend on for your wellness and make sure you're getting a good ROI on them. Like what we have definitely found at times that we've spent chunks of money on something, and people don't value them. So if you're looking for a budget, because you're absolutely right, you're going to need money to pay for it, check that you're not spending money on something that you're not getting a return from.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think we picked up from an organization I thought was fantastic was that they reframed it. Rather than asking for budget, they were asking for investment, because they were talking to the leadership team around, this is an investment in your people, and this is an investment in our organization and our customers, because if our people are happier and working harder, then it's going to be a better outcome for everyone. So they reframed the way that they were asking for that money as an investment in the organization. And they said, when you start talking about I want budget or I want money versus I want to make an investment, it has a very different connotation. They found in their organization it had a really great impact in their ability to get more money for things like this as well, which was, I
I
think.
can add to that, Rebecca. I think that's the key of that measurement on an ongoing basis. And it's like, actually, it's not then just making that initial business case, but to your point, it's then at the end of that financial year or whatever it is going back. So for us, we went and surveyed all the members using GivenWell, and we're able to now see a 30% increase in staff who are fully engaged at work. So we can go back to our customers and say, hey, this is what we've seen. What's the value of that to an organization? We've seen twice as many staff now with great wellbeing. Okay, what does that do for sick leave? What does that do for churn? What does that do for cost? We're seeing 33% more staff now rating the employer as a great place to work. Okay, what does that mean for attracting the best people, and so on? And you can actually put numbers to it. It's just a matter of getting really intentional around what you're measuring and what you measure that success, and then how you ultimately, report that up. But there's heaps of really good information out there on the value. But most places see it between 5 to 12 times for every dollar you spend if you're doing proactive care.
Fantastic, thank you. And that actually just answered one of our questions in the Q&A, which was around what metrics are you using to utilize when you think about the impact. So that's great. So I might actually ask another question from our Q&A now. And I might start with you, Jenny. So there's a question here around, if you remove a wellness option and replaced it with another, how is it best to manage this to people who don't feel like something's being taken away? And I think as a more broad question, if you think about when you're, as a head of HR, when you're rolling out wellness or wellbeing policies or procedures or experiences or whatever that might be, and you're having to maybe take something away, or maybe you're putting something in, how are you communicating it, and how are you talking to employees about why you're putting it in place and what it means for the organization?
I think, again, it just comes back to really understanding what the feedback is from the people and what the data is telling you. Because our people's needs can change over time. So if you're on top of that, if you're understanding, if you're having the right measures in place, you're understanding the data and you're getting the right data through the right channels, and that's helping you have a finger on the pulse, I think it's going to help your vision, your communication to the wider business about, hey, we're looking to evolve our benefits program, for example. We're looking to evolve our practices or whatever it might be. I think like a basic example is that we've had our EAP provider for many years, since the very start of this business, and we felt that the service offering that they provide is the bare minimum. You know, what we expect from EAP and what other services that come under that offering has involved much more. So we didn't take that away. We just replaced it with a better, refreshed experience and more beneficial add-ons to that. We now provide, you know, in addition to our EAP, nutritional recipes, because wellness isn't just about, you know, mental agility, for example. It's also about your physical health. You know, what you feed into your body is how you portray out. So, you know, we provide workout videos, we provide guided meditation on top of, you know, 24 counseling and mental support. So I think it's all coming down to what's driving your intent. So if the feedback is there, and the feedback is from your people and through various channels over time, you're going to be able to identify the key themes to help drive your agenda. So if you don't have that, you're going in blind, and then therefore the vision is not visioning, if that's even the right phrase, and the communication wouldn't be there and the alignment wouldn't be there. And so that would impact the synergy of what you're trying to do and what the outcomes are of that. So
Great, thank you. We have one other question in the chat, which was thoughts around engagement or for trade-based roles and people who are not in the office and teams that are not on site, and using a traditional corporate approach doesn't necessarily work. And what have you seen work well? And I think just from a point that we have, so one of the organisations that Great Place to Work we work with quite a lot of construction companies, and we have a great construction company that was actually named one of the best workplaces in Australia called McNab in Queensland. And they have a Tools Down for Safety Day, which means everyone stops work. But they don't just focus on physical safety, they have focuses on mental health and different types of safety. And so they bring well-being into the way in which the organisation can work and becomes a tradition in their organisation. But it's also seen as something that's critically important for them, because it's important enough for everyone to stop doing their job for a day and focus on what needs to be done. So they're showing actually it's not a cost to the organisation. It's something that really matters, but it also ensures that the organisation is profitable. So your well-being is a critical part of the organisation, and that's one thing that we've seen in organisations that are not office-based that's worked really well. So given time, we've only got 10 minutes left, and so I wanted to ask you all one more question that everyone could have a takeaway from. So for each of you, I wanted to know if you've got one piece of practical advice that any leader watching today could take back to their team tomorrow. So Brad, I might start with you.
It would be listening to your people and getting the data before you act. It'll be very easy to think, oh, I should do this or I should do that. But what I've found is that quite often what you think people are after is not what they're saying. So get the data and then act is the key message.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jenny, what about yourself?
Well, Brad stole mine, so I feel like I need to say something different. So,
Sorry.
I think, in addition to what Brad was saying, which is also very important, I think, you know, what we do for our people in the wellbeing space or any initiative, I think it's very important that it is in your business strategy. So, it has to form part of a critical part of the.
Oh, I think Jenny's frozen. Oh, okay. I might jump over to Johnny because I think Jenny's frozen there. So,
I could try and guess what she's saying, but I won't do that.
We'll come back to Jenny if she unfreezes. Johnny, what about you? What's one piece of practical advice that someone watching could take away?
I think, you know, from our experience, what we're seeing working is this whole idea of get out of the way. You know, like we're all, you know, everyone who's on this call are part of a team, and we all have our own things for well-being, right? You know, like everyone here, some people will be into yoga, some will be surfers, some will love therapy, some will love massage. Like you just got to think at some point, like my team are me, they're no different. And kind of once you have that realization that our teams are just the same as us and they are all unique, they all want their own things. It's just kind of like this moment of like, well, what do people want? They want to be treated like adults. They want to be empowered. They want that kind of autonomy and independence and personal choice. Like, my encouragement would be just give it to them. Get out of the way, empower the team, and you'd be surprised what happens. Sometimes the more we do, it can actually kind of have a negative impact as opposed to positive. And to that question before about, taking things away, and, people tell you what they want and you implement it, they tell you want something else. And as soon as you try and take, well, we gave you this, now let's take the budget, put it over here instead. Oh, no, I don't want to lose that, Whereas actually, if instead of giving them things, empower them to choose for themselves, and then you're never taking anything away. It's a constant gift. And yeah, so that would be my key takeaway is get out of the way.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you all to the panel, and thank you to Jenny, who obviously has some internet issues and has dropped off, but it was really fantastic hearing from you all around what you're doing in your organizations and the organizations you're working with around wellbeing. We're actually going to be sending a follow-up email for everybody on this call, which will have the Great Place to Work Wellbeing report, which will come out, which has some examples from Hub, has some examples from lots of different companies around what they're doing for wellbeing. And we'll also follow it up with the report that we've done with Johns Hopkins University as well around wellbeing in the workplace, and what are some of the facets of wellbeing, and what are the trends we're seeing in Australia. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Jenny, as well, for joining us. Sorry, dropped out there a little bit, but thank you everybody. We're really great to hear all your feedback, all of your ideas, and yeah, have a wonderful Thursday afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Much.
Bye.
Everyone.